Alrighty, we are live, people. So I'm gonna give people a couple of minutes to tune in, and this is happening. In the meantime, I'm gonna take a sip of my coffee, which is right here. Yes, my cup is bigger than me, don't judge me. Alrighty. So today is Sunday, and this is Sasha Sunday, right? So I'm very excited to do this. I totally didn't think I was going to be doing it, but I am excited, and I'm excited to share what I have for you guys right now. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is relationships. That's one of the things that I said in my video originally that I wanted to talk about during this Sasha Sunday. And the relationship that I want to discuss today is your relationship with yourself. So that relationship is actually one of the toughest ones because a lot of people don't have a good relationship with themselves. And I want to share a quote. Someone said they're not judging me for my coffee. Thanks. But I want to share a quote. It says, the relationship with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship you have. And that's a quote by Jane Travis. And I think that's very true. And feel free to comment if you agree or disagree with that. But one of the reasons that I think that that's true is because it reminds me of a scripture in the Bible. I believe it's Mark 12:30, where Jesus is speaking about the two greatest commandments. And he says that the greatest commandment is to love God above all things, but the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. And one of the things that I find that people struggle with is being able to love their neighbor as themselves. The reason for this is somebody's commenting on my bookshelf. Thank you. The reason for this is because a lot of times we are unbalanced, right? So we will either love ourselves more than our neighbor, or we will love our neighbor more than ourselves. And both extremes are bad, right? If you love your neighbor more than yourself, that can lead to things like self-neglect, toxic relationships, and it also causes the problem that you begin to put the responsibility for your happiness onto someone else. So that's always obviously not a good thing, because the moment that someone fails you, you start your world falls apart, right? So the second thing that we have a tendency to do is to love ourselves more than our neighbor. And when you do that, what you're doing is becoming prideful. You're putting your needs and your things before others. So both of those extremes are obviously bad. So what's important is that we have a balance, right? Jesus said we need to love your neighbor as yourself. So both things are equally important. So the level of love that you give to yourself, you should also be giving to your neighbor. And when you don't know how to love yourself well, what you end up doing is not loving others well either. So that affects your relationships in general. So needless to say, your relationship with yourself is one of the most important relationships you can have. So I want to talk about a few different reasons that it can, that you can have trouble loving yourself, right? So the first one I want to talk about is lack of identity. Lack of identity has to do with you not knowing who you are, with you not knowing who God has called you to be. And one of the issues with that is that if you don't know who you are, you can't love yourself, right? Because you don't know what you love. You don't know what to love about yourself. So there's two things that I think when it comes to identity that you really need to take into consideration. One of them is the position that God has given you, right? Your position being that you are a daughter or a son of God. So already with that, you have to be able to love yourself and to know that God has called you his, you belong to him. So you have worth. There was a sacrifice that was made for you by Jesus Christ because God loved you so much. And so when you're able to acknowledge that part, when you're able to acknowledge what God did for you, you begin to be able to love yourself a little more. You begin to know who you are. The second thing having to do with identity is your personality, right? So your personality is something that is also God-given. It has your talents, your the mission that God has given you, your dreams, your emotions, your feelings, everything that is encompassed in who you are, that is part of your identity. And that is also God given. So I have a kind of a funny story to tell. One of the things that happened to me in my life at some point is that I was struggling a little bit with low self-esteem and struggling to figure out who I was. And I had a conversation with a family member. I'm not going to say who it is, but I was kind of, just trying to figure out who I am. And my family member said to me, well, maybe you need to go out and do some crazy stuff and to figure out who you are. And I was like, no, I'm not really a crazy type of person. So he goes and tells me, well, now you know that at least you're not crazy, right? And I tell this story because the point of that is that a lot of times in order to know who you are, you have to know who you're not, right? And so that's going to affect you, right? Being able to know who you are and having that identity established and just being aware of who you are is important in order to be able to have an identity that is established and to have love for yourself, right? So the second reason that I find that a lot of people have trouble loving themselves is because they're dealing with guilt from things that have happened in their past, guilt from things that, that they maybe have done. And the problem with guilt is that it keeps you in this vicious cycle, right? It keeps you trying to avoid yourself because you don't want to deal with the stuff that is inside you. You don't want to deal with the things that you have done, But the thing is that God didn't call us to have guilt. God didn't call us to be condemned. In fact, he sent his son to save us. And so I want today, if you are dealing with guilt, for you to be able to forgive yourself. And forgiving yourself is not easy. It's probably one of the hardest things that you have to do. It's probably harder than forgiving other people. But if you are going to forgive yourself, you need to be able to verbalize that thing. You need to be able to verbalize what it is that you need to forgive yourself for. If you don't forgive yourself, you're not going to be able to forgive other people. If you don't forgive yourself, you're not going to be able to love yourself. So number three is low self-worth. A lot of us have had a point in our life where someone has said something about us that wasn't true, and we believe the lie. They said something negative about you that wasn't true, and you believe the lie. And because of that, you begin to internalize that thing, and you begin to believe that you're not worthy, or that you're not good enough, or that you can't do certain things, you can't accomplish certain things. But the fact of the matter is that you can. You can do so many things, and you have to stop believing and hearing these voices that are trying to condemn you. And you have to learn how to separate yourself and set limits with people who are only trying to, get you stuck and are trying to separate you from your destiny and what God has called you to do. So don't listen to the lie, people. Don't listen to the lie. You don't have to listen. Yes, don't believe the lie. You don't have to believe the lie. You have to believe the truth about what God says about you. If you don't know what God says about you, you need to start reading your Bible because there's lots of information of yourself in there. So number 4, I'm going to say wrong patterns of thinking. So by this, I mean that some people think that if you love yourself, that's being selfish. And that's not true. Loving yourself more than you love others, that's being selfish. But just loving yourself is not being selfish. And I think it's necessary. In that scripture that I stated at the beginning, you have to be able to love yourself in order to love others. That is the level of measurement that you have for how you treat other people. The same way you wouldn't do something to harm yourself, you wouldn't do that thing to harm others. So I find that a lot of moms, especially with the mommy guilt, deal with that. Like, they would rather do stuff for their children than do stuff for themselves. And I think you have to have, limits. You have to have limits, Alexandra. You have to have limits, and you have to have balance, right? Everything in life is about balance. Are you ever going to have perfect balance? No, it's impossible. You won't have perfect balance. But let's say that this week it was all about your kids. Next week, take some time to do something for you. right? So it's balance. You know, your kids are going to know that you love them, as long as you have that balance week to week. I think it doesn't matter that one day you take out for yourself, as long as, you know, the next day is dedicated to your kids, or dedicated to your husband, or dedicated to, you know, your friends or whatever. You need to have all of those things. And yes, self-love is self-care. Exactly. You know, and I think a lot of people get confused and think that, you know, that it's being prideful, and it's not. Right. I like this example that somebody said to me the other day, but I've heard it before that too. You know, when you get on a plane and they have these masks that they're like breathing masks in case of an emergency or something. And, you know, they always tell you that if, you know, if the mask comes on, you need to put on the mask for yourself first before you place it on someone else. That's because if you put the mask on someone else and you're trying to put the mask on someone else and you run out of air, guess what? None of you are getting the mask put on. So it's important that you be able to take care of yourself, because that's the only way you can take care of others. You can't pour into others when you yourself are empty, right? Speaking of pouring, I'll take another sip of my coffee. I don't want it to get cold. Okay, number 5. Trauma, right? A lot of us have dealt with trauma, things that have happened in our lives that make it hard to love ourselves. And this kind of goes back to that whole dealing with guilt or the low self-worth. Because when someone has done something to you that makes you feel less than, you have a lower self-worth, you have a lower self-esteem. Or when you've done something that caused trauma in your life, you end up dealing with guilt. But the problem with trauma is that it causes us to avoid being with ourselves, right? And one of the things that I've learned is that if you don't enjoy your own company, yes, the coffee cup is bigger than me. I know I already said that in the beginning. If you don't enjoy your own company, then it means you have a problem with yourself, right? If you don't enjoy your own company, you have an issue with yourself. There's an unresolved issue that you have with yourself that you have not dealt with. And a lot of that stems from trauma, right? Because you avoid being by yourself. I remember when I was going through some difficult situations in my life, I picked up a second job, and I went from one job to the other, and it kind of like, I was stressed. Like, even though I wasn't dealing with what I was feeling and everything that that was going on inside of me, I wasn't dealing with it because I was so busy. And I think that sometimes we think that being busy is being productive, and that's not necessarily true. There are seasons in your life where God calls you to be productive, and you're doing a lot of things. Your hands are on a lot of things. You wear lots of different hats. But that doesn't mean that you're busy. That means that you're productive. However, on the flip side of that, there are seasons in your life where you make yourself busy doing things that God didn't ask you to do. And a lot of the reason that we do that, well, sometimes it's because of need, but sometimes it's because you're trying to avoid dealing with certain things in yourself. So I want you to think about, what are you avoiding? What are the things that you might be avoiding in yourself that are causing you to kind of, not want to be around yourself? So at the end of the day, if you don't want to be alone with yourself, guess what? Nobody else is going to want to be around you either. And that doesn't help to this whole thing that God is asking us to do, to love others as we love ourselves. God is a relational being, and so he calls us to be relational as well. We need to have relationships with each other. Another thing that can happen with trauma is that you begin to have resentment, right? And lack of forgiveness. You begin to hold things in. You begin to internalize all of those things. And there's this quote by Nelson Mandela that says that resentment is like drinking a cup of poison and waiting for something to happen to someone else, right? Is waiting for the bad things to happen to them, for them to be affected by the poison. But resentment is actually something that hurts you. It's something that kills you and makes you sick inside. So in order to deal with that stuff, sometimes we have to learn to forgive. We have to learn to forgive others. We have to learn to forgive ourselves. And even with that, we have to learn to forgive God. And I say that treading lightly, just because God doesn't really need to be forgiven for anything. But sometimes we have resentment against God, and it causes a stumbling block between our relationship with him. So those are all things that we need to deal with, things that we need to think about when it comes to being able to love yourself. So those are the 5 things that I think are the hardest, for people. If you have others that you can think of, put them in the comments. We can discuss those as well. But I think that for the most part, those are 5 that I can think of that we struggle with. And so I want to give you some suggestions. Have you guys ever read this book called The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman? If anybody knows me, I talk about this book a lot. I love this book. Love, love, love this book. And I'm not even getting paid to promote Gary Chapman. I should be getting some, something. Anyway, Gary Chapman is a very intelligent man. But in the 5 love languages, he talks about 5 languages that everybody speaks in terms of love, and they are receiving gifts. That's mine, by the way. If anybody ever wants to bless me with stuff, I love receiving gifts. And number 2 is words of affirmation. Number 3 is quality time. Number 4 is acts of service. And number 5 is physical touch. So all of these things, I think that we can apply to the way that we love ourselves, right? So if you like receiving gifts, get yourself something once in a while. That's a good way to love yourself. Another thing, words of affirmation. Listen to the way that you talk to yourself, because I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy. We say so many negative things to ourselves, and we talk down to ourselves so much. And we need to learn to be able to speak positively to ourselves. Like, if you need to put sticky notes on your mirror to give yourself words of affirmation, do so. If you need to schedule, a reminder on your phone to give you something, do it. If you need to buy a book about affirmations, do it. But whatever you need to do, you need to start loving yourself by the way that you speak to yourself. I see some of you have read it or are reading it now. I hope you're enjoying it. It's a really powerful book. But now you can apply it in this way to yourself, loving yourself as well. Quality time. Like I said before, you need to be able to spend time with yourself. You need to be able to enjoy your own company. That's something that I have learned to do, and I figured out so many things about myself in this past season of my life. You see all the books behind me? I have read a lot of them, actually, and still reading them. But I was never really into reading like that. But I figured that about myself because I started to spend time, alone with myself. You need to do things that you enjoy. You need to go back, like Jesus said, you need to go back to your first love. You need to go back to who you were before whatever traumatic event happened, and start to enjoy your own company again. The 4th one, acts of service. Acts of service, do things for yourself. If you're a woman, go get a manicure once in a while. Or if you don't have money to get a manicure, give yourself a manicure at home. I know somebody who does manicures at home very well. I'm not going to say who. I don't want you to blow up her Facebook. Okay. So there's that. Do things for yourself. Do nice things for yourself. Get yourself, a cup of coffee. Like me, I love coffee. That's a nice way to spend time with yourself. Drinking coffee, reading a good book. I mean, if you're not into reading, do something else. But anyway, that's the point. And lastly, physical touch, right? So physical touch is a weird one. I'm not sure that we can apply that one exactly in that way. But physical touch is something that I have learned to do when I'm on my own, is to be present. And I think that physical touch in a way is a little bit of a part of that. Something that I like to do is to use my 5 senses to be present in a moment. So if I'm really enjoying a moment, instead of pulling out my camera to try to record it, even though, that's nice, being able to record your nice moments and look back on them. But sometimes what I want to do, I want to enjoy that moment. I want to take in the whole moment. What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What do I hear? What's around me? And that's an important thing to do even when you're alone. What is it that you enjoy? I discovered I love sleeping. I love sleeping, guys. I have like an 8 o'clock bedtime. It's almost my bedtime, actually. I'm kidding. Not kidding. But the point being, man, I have some comfortable bed sheets because of that, and that's that physical touch thing. What makes you feel good? You have to do all these things for yourself. So now that I said all of that, what are the things you guys think hinder us from loving ourselves, and what can we do to be able to love ourselves better? I kind of want this to be more so a conversation. I'm done listening to my own voice, so I am taking comments. Enjoying silence. Pastor Jess says she enjoys silence. I understand that. Um, let me see. Being mindful of who you are and where you are. Peace. Yeah, definitely. I think peace is something that a lot of people don't really realize that they need until they don't have it. Um, yeah, I know a season in my life where I didn't realize how not at peace I was until I finally did have peace. And I think that's definitely an important part of being able to love yourself. Listening to music. Yes, listening to music. You know, what you listen to is so important. If you are going through a state in your life where you're like depressed, listening to sad music is not going to help you. Um, but listening to, again, going back to that positive words of affirmation, listening to music that is going to keep you positive, that is going to motivate you, that is going to inspire you, those are things that are awesome for being able to love yourself and spend time with yourself. Yeah, loving yourself can be difficult when you put others before yourself. Yeah, so going again to that topic of balance, right? We need to have that balance in order to equally love others the same way that we would love ourselves, and not going above and beyond for others if you're not willing to go above and beyond for yourself. Yes, Taboo Sunday. I did make some reference to that. Yeah, we talked about music at Taboo Sunday, right? Not everything is beneficial to us. You know, we have to have wisdom in what we allow ourselves to listen to, because music is very influential. It is. So, um, I don't know if you guys enjoyed this. If you want me to talk more about relationships in the future, that was another thing I was gonna say earlier. Whatever topics you want me to discuss, because I'm gonna be doing this every Sunday, put it in the comments. And I will definitely touch upon it. If there's things that are burning inside you that you want to know, um, I love to talk. So give me some ideas. Meditation and yoga is good for the mind and body. Yes, meditation is so important. I think we don't do that enough. Um, and the Bible tells us that we should be meditating. We should be meditating on what the word says, and what God says about us, but even meditating on those positive affirmations that I was talking about before. What do those things mean? You know, what does it mean to love yourself? What does it mean to have peace, to have joy? All those things are important and are things we should be meditating on and thinking about constantly. The Apostle Paul in the Bible also says that everything that is pure and lovely and good, those are the things that we should think about. And I mean, meditating is definitely right there. So someone said it's hard to love yourself when you forget how to disconnect from day-to-day life. We must disconnect to reconnect. Wow, I like that. We must disconnect to reconnect. It's true. Sometimes you need to pull yourself away from everyone for a little bit. It goes back to that whole thing I was saying about enjoying your own company. You have to be able to separate yourself for a little bit, to be able to pour into someone else. Like I said, you can't pour from a cup that's empty. And you do have to disconnect yourself sometimes. Sometimes you got to disconnect from social media. Sometimes you have to, turn off your phone for a couple of hours and just be by yourself. It's so important that we be able to do those things. Yes, I'm loving this conversation, guys. Thank you for all the comments. Any other suggestions? Or did I miss anything in terms of things that maybe are the reason that we don't love ourselves that well, or that we don't take care of ourselves that well? Yes, we do. Sometimes we just need to reboot. That's true. How do you guys reboot? What do you do to reboot? I give myself weekly facials. Some of the women know about those facials. They're really good. Maybe I'll do a video on that one of these days. And Erica, I am drinking out of the cup that you gave me. It says empowered women, empower women. I love this cup. It's super huge. It satisfies all my coffee drinking needs. Yeah, meditation does release the negative energy. Oh, guys, Nancy does massages. I'm giving you some free promotion, Nancy. That also helps you to relax and reboot. Those massages, you need to get one. Hit her up on your own time, not through here. Okay. Let me see. You need what? You need a massage? The masseuse needs a massage. Oh, love you too, Pastor Jess. Alrighty, guys. Well, if you have any other comments, leave them there. And next Sunday, I will address some other things. But stay tuned. Thank you for tuning in today. It's Sunday. I'm Sasha, and this has been Sasha Sundays. Thanks.